No franchise knows the ups and downs of incredible success, abysmal disappointment, and totally canceled projects like Star Wars. With that, no video game publisher is as familiar with the same spectrum of achievement and setbacks as the infamous LucasArts. It seems, in a weird way, predictable that one of the more promising Star Wars IPs to ever be announced would be infamously bungled by these two entities, at least in hindsight. Of the many various disappointments of the Star Wars universe over the last several years is Star Wars 1313. This game certainly made its mark in the gaming space, perhaps more than any other Star Wars game had in a very long time, despite never even being released. When Star Wars 1313 was softly revealed way back in 2012 on Game Trailers TV's website, then officially announced the following year at E3, it generated more than its fair share of hype from its E3 announcement trailer, which seemed to show off a single-player third-person shooter based on a crime-ridden underworld of Coruscant, and wore the grittiness of that world on its sleeve. This was definitely a different kind of Star Wars, in that, understandably, got a lot of gamers excited. It makes sense that after decades of placating family-friendly audiences with limited violence and carefully chosen expletives, that a lane for a demand for a more mature, M-rated Star Wars game would exist. But with all that excitement and with all the enthusiasm on the part of gaming audiences as well as the developers, what was to become of this project? Instead of the beaming success that fans were expecting, and it was, at least at one point, poised to be, Star Wars 1313 died before it could even live, much to the dismay of almost everybody. But why? With a winning combination of the style and pedigree of the folks working on it, the enthusiasm of the countless gamers ready to play it, and the bottomless pockets of the rights holders behind its development, why could this game not make it out of development? What the hell happened to Star Wars 1313? While many of the modern Star Wars films failed to really explore much of the side characters in any meaningful way, they did do one thing right. They touched on just enough things outside of the tunnel vision of the main storyline to leave room for countless others to explore later on. This is the difference between creating a series of movies and creating a world. At that time, Star Wars 1313 seemed to be the franchise's most ambitious example of somebody who was not George Lucas exploring the Star Wars lore. Initially, the game was pitched as a deep dive into a young new character as he scoured the underbelly of Coruscant between the time of the prequel trilogy and the original 3 films. Originally called Star Wars Underworld, the game would undergo a series of drastic changes over time. The many layers of communication that existed between developers of any given Star Wars game and George Lucas himself was a notorious hurdle for anybody working with LucasArts. Developers of all types would have to go through all of it to get answers to questions which would take exorbitant amounts of time. This often led to confusion and decreases in morale. It didn't work that way the other way around though, as Lucas could easily throw a monkey wrench down from the heavens straight into development at any moment with demands to drastically change things. Most developers were aware that he was prone to making sweeping changes and U-turns with zero notice or consideration for what was already being done, but that didn't make it any less problematic for Star Wars 1313. While collaboration is always a good thing with massive projects, especially early on in development, the project would suffer from having too many chefs in the kitchen and the corresponding disarray that causes, and unfortunately would lead the project to the series of setbacks it is now known for, one of which was launching the game alongside a Star Wars Underworld tie-in TV show that was also put on hold indefinitely. LucasArts changing precedents several times throughout development also didn't help with communication issues. Ultimately, despite the many shifts the game would make, some even just weeks before the game's E3 reveal, the direction would be settled on an action-adventure game loosely inspired by Gears of War's cover system and Uncharted's adventurous tone. By this time, though, so many other directions for the game had come and gone, including making it a Grand Theft Auto clone. Additionally, so much money and effort had been used and so much staff turnover at all levels had occurred that the game was doomed to be a shapeless blob of ideas and directions that had no real chance of success eventually. Little did we, the gaming public, know just how dismal the project's chances were when we saw that first incredible trailer. Unceremoniously, one of the biggest and most sudden shifts to occur was the change of the main character, who had already been created, written, and voiced, to Boba Fett. reportedly at George's request. As somebody who was notoriously impossible to say no to and still maintained control over everything, George would get what George wanted, and the team scrambled to accommodate his demands. And the game was drastically changed. Once it was revealed at E3 through a trailer, the fan reactions were explosively positive. The trailer dazzled Star Wars fans and gamers alike with its outstanding graphics, creative take on the lore, and fresh take on the universe, despite still being firmly rooted in what already existed. The opening segment alone was enough to sell the audience on the game. The developer's visual style of gritty metal interiors and third-person shooting were on full display, as well as that excellent Star Wars soundscape that is unmistakable in our culture. The Uncharted influence was also unmistakable, with the two main characters being an older man and a younger, more spirited protege of sorts, reminiscent of the dynamic between Nathan Drake and Sully. Needless to say, developer and gamer excitement were through the roof for the first time in a long time. However, events outside of LucasArts were developing that would ultimately be the final nail in the coffin for Star Wars 1313. George Lucas, still reeling from the blowback of the prequel trilogy, had decided to make a move he had been contemplating for years and sold all of his intellectual property to Disney, making him even more excessively rich than he already was, but also dropping many projects that were already in motion into the hands of a very different company with very different goals for the franchise. Bad news for a game that was already a risky endeavor in the first place. As with any major acquisition like this, plenty of confusion and a lack of cohesion fell through the corporate channels all the way to the bottom, and it would be a little while before the dust settled. Once that happened though, despite some attempts by Bob Iger, the chief executive officer of Walt Disney, to quell the discontent, it was soon clear that Disney had its own plans for the franchise and they would not include Star Wars 1313, or even LucasArts at all. Disney wanted to bank on new canon films, big-budget EA Battlefront games, and treat almost anything else happening on the sidelines as unnecessary fat to be cut. This would make the issues plaguing the IP under LucasArts look like child's play, as Disney would drop an atomic bomb on gamers by eliminating the franchise's most anticipated game in years, and replace it with two Battlefront games that were, well, you know. While the story of Star Wars 1313 is indeed an upsetting one on multiple levels, it's also a very educational one. Basically, everything that could go wrong during the course of a video game's development did here, from bad communication between corporate entities, a head honcho who was disconnected from the work being done on the ground, and unrecognized potential falling through the cracks because of short-sighted corporate acquisitions. The failure of Star Wars 1313 has it all. The sting of losing this game can still be felt to this day by Star Wars fans across the generations. The dark story of 1313 and its crime-ridden shenanigans is one that fans of the Star Wars lore deserve to see one day, but if they ever do, it will likely be in a galaxy far, far away from this one. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.